Found out my partner had another relationship. We tried to reconcile, but I'm walking away. Chapter 1. The morning that changed everything. It's astonishing how a single moment can upend years of trust and love in an instant. I never thought I would become the person who checks a partner's location or rummages through phone settings, seeking proof of infidelity. But one brisk morning, I found myself sprawled on the sofa, staring at the soft glow of a map on my phone, trying to reconcile the dot I saw on the screen with the man I had known for 7 years. My heart pounded with an unfamiliar dread, a force that seized me by the throat. I was 47 at the time, and my partner, let's call him Damian, was 59. We'd had what I believed was a loving, mature, and supportive relationship, albeit an unconventional one. Damian was no ordinary guy. He was a writer, an academic sort of writer, actually, who travelled frequently for research. Over the years of our relationship, I had grown to enjoy, or at least accept, the fact that he was often on the road. I was used to the long phone calls, the late-night texts that said, "I can't sleep without hearing your voice." There were moments when I imagined him hunched over his laptop in hotel rooms, tapping away at the keys, chasing the next chapter of his book. But that morning, everything I thought I knew shattered. I noticed a discrepancy. He had claimed to be in his usual hotel in a certain city, one I had grown suspicious of. But the location on Find My iPhone showed him at a house in a totally different part of town. The little dot lingered there for hours, ignoring my calls, ignoring my texts. It was as if he had evaporated into a quiet, residential street. My breath caught in my throat as an onslaught of fears pounced on me. What reason could he have for lying? Who owned that house? And why on earth had he chosen that precise day to vanish from my radar? I had to gather the courage to consider the possibility that he was with someone else. Instantly, I felt a sting behind my eyes, a burning wave of tears that threatened to blur the phone screen. We had been together for 7 years, living a short flight apart, a distance we once found romantic and freeing. It gave us the best of both worlds, intimacy without monotony, passion without constant intrusion. But now that arrangement felt like a chasm in which secrets could hide. I forced myself to set the phone aside and press my palms into my eyes. I told myself to breathe in, out, in, out. My mind spewed a dozen rationalizations. Maybe he left his phone at a friend's house. Maybe it was an innocent gathering, and he just got busy. But a grim truth loomed. For at least 8 months, I had noticed signs that something felt off. I recalled the times my texts went unread for hours, when he claimed to be in the zone. With his writing, I remembered moments when he'd mentioned phone troubles, or times he swore he replied to me, even though no message ever arrived. And all those times he sounded testy or annoyed whenever I pressed for details. I needed answers. But I also felt fear, because if my suspicions were right, if he was indeed with another woman, my life was about to change irrevocably. Chapter 2. Our unconventional arrangement. Before diving deeper into the heartbreak, let me give you some background on our arrangement. I, a 47-year-old consultant at a mid-sized marketing firm, lived in a cheerful one-bedroom condo in a city known for its mild climate and buzzing downtown. My job demanded a Monday through Friday routine, rarely affording me the flexibility to pick up and leave whenever I liked. Meanwhile, Damian, 59, was a writer with a flexible schedule. Over the years, we settled into a pattern. He flew to see me regularly, more often than I went to see him. We didn't cohabitate, which puzzled our friends and families. 7 years together, and you don't live with him, they'd exclaim. Isn't that weird? The truth was, it worked for us. We each had our own complicated histories. I had been through a contentious divorce in my early 30s, and he had children from a previous marriage, the youngest of whom had just graduated high school. Our separate spaces felt safe, like each of us had a cocoon to retreat into when we needed. And for a long time, it was good. We cherished the precious weekends and the occasional extended holiday visits. I felt secure in this relationship. Damian was the kind of man who made grand statements about loyalty and fidelity. Early on, he told me that trust was paramount to him, that he would never dream of betraying someone he loved. And I believed him. We both had a thorough talk about exclusivity, about how we were each other's person. Even if we weren't married, my faith in him ran so deep that it took an embarrassingly long time for me to accept that he might be lying. So, how did I end up in a situation where I was basically monitoring his location? It wasn't the norm. In the past, we'd swapped phone location details casually. He said it made him feel close to me, like we were bridging the distance by seeing where each other was. I'd grown comfortable glancing at his location once in a while, especially if I was worried he might be driving at night. I never thought it would become a tool to discover betrayal. And yet, as the months wore on, I began to see patterns. Whenever he was in a certain city, let's call it Bloomville, my texts would remain unread for suspiciously long stretches. Calls went to voicemail. When he eventually responded, he had the same excuses: phone trouble, or he was just so immersed in my research. The explanation rarely satisfied me. Something intangible gnawed at me, stirring anxiety in my gut, but I pushed it aside because I trusted him. I told myself, he's a writer. Writers can vanish into their own world sometimes. Yet that morning's location mishap made me realize I had been ignoring the obvious. How many times had I allowed his half-baked excuses to pass unchallenged because I didn't want to spark an argument? Because I was terrified of losing him. I thought about the many times I offered to join him on a research trip, only to be gently discouraged. He'd say, "You'd be bored to death. This stuff is so niche." Now, standing in my living room, phone in hand, I recalled all the times he nimbly changed the subject when I asked what exactly he was researching. All the times I noticed location anomalies, but let them go. My heart hammered with guilt and confusion. Why did it take me so long to see it? Chapter 3: Searching for Proof. After that initial shock, I tried to calm my trembling fingers and embarked on a hesitant investigation. With each passing minute, a swirl of dread, heartbreak, and curiosity churned in my chest. I needed to confirm the truth. At least part of me did, before I confronted him. That day, he was nowhere to be found. His location eventually turned off, going completely dark. My calls rang endlessly, texts sat unread. By nighttime, I was in a frenzy. In an act of desperation, I took a screenshot of the dots showing him at that quiet suburban house near his usual hotel. Later, I typed the address into Google, hoping for some clue. Almost instantly, I found a name connected to that house. A woman's name. Let's call her Rebecca. My breath caught. Checking social media, I discovered that Damian followed her. She wasn't some random follower. She had a small presence on multiple platforms, posted pictures of her cozy suburban life, and occasionally discussed books she was reading. I noticed with a jolt that she'd read the same obscure titles Damian had been raving about, a curious synchronicity of taste that made my heart pound. I felt my pulse in my ears as I stared at her face in the profile photo. She looked about my age, maybe slightly younger, with a bright smile. Nothing about her or her feed screamed, "I'm having an affair with a man in a relationship." But then again, what does that even look like? Over the next few hours, I combed through old texts and call logs. I made a list of dates and times he had travelled to Bloomville, cross-referencing it with location anomalies. My stomach sank as I found 6 separate instances that fit the suspicious pattern. He's been meeting her for months. I realized. The heartbreak of that realization rippled through me in waves, leaving me numb. Despite the mounting evidence, I still needed something more solid, or at least I wanted to give him a chance to come clean. I didn't want a blow-at confrontation fueled by my anger. I wanted a calm, humane conversation where he might, if he loved me at all, admit his wrongdoing and level with me. Maybe we'd figure it out together. Perhaps we could salvage the relationship if he was honest about what he'd done. The timing was complicated. He was scheduled to visit me for Thanksgiving, which also meant seeing my extended family. Should I cancel it? Should I let him come and see if he confesses on his own? I felt paralyzed, but eventually I decided to go through with the holiday and see how he behaved. If he lied brazenly to my face, well, that would tell me everything I needed to know. Chapter 4, the Thanksgiving Visit. When Damian arrived for Thanksgiving, it was almost surreal how normal he seemed. He greeted me with the usual warmth, hugging me, gazing into my eyes with that old affection. It nearly unraveled me. How could he be so tender if he's cheating? I wondered, heart hammering. At the dinner table with my family, he laughed and told jokes, updated them on his writing progress, and teased me about some silly incident from last year. Meanwhile, I studied him like a hawk, analyzing every nuance of his words and expressions. He seemed at ease, even happy, but occasionally I noticed a flicker of tension in his eyes, like he sensed something was off in my demeanor. Over the next couple of days, I attempted to give him openings to confess. I gently probed with questions about his travels, asked if he had anything to share about his personal life, or if anything was bothering him. He shook his head, gave me a kind smile, and insisted everything was wonderful. I kept my composure, but inside I felt panic swirling. I could barely sleep, and when I did, nightmares jolted me awake. My gut told me he was lying, yet I also wondered if I was being paranoid. The fear of confrontation gripped me. I'd witnessed Damian's anger in the past over smaller accusations, times he exploded if he felt wrongly accused. Maybe he'll break down and admit it if I keep pressing, I thought. But after several attempts, I got nowhere. On the final day of his visit, I drove him to the airport. My mind whirled with conflicting impulses. Should I confront him in the car? Demand the truth while he was locked in my presence? But fear got the better of me. Instead, I just squeezed the steering wheel and forced a smile when he kissed my cheek and said, "See you soon." Then he vanished through the airport doors. But an hour later, I checked his location out of a frantic habit and saw something baffling. Instead of heading home, his dot showed him traveling in the opposite direction, back to Bloomville. The map glitch-stuttered for a moment, then it pinned him at an airport terminal in that city. 10 minutes later, my calls went unanswered. I was in a daze, my chest pounding with betrayal. So he lied to me again. He flew not to his home, but to see her. I texted him a single message. "He know what you're doing." It bounced back as undelivered, which meant he had turned off his phone or blocked me. Reality crashed down on me, and a wave of sheer panic overcame me. My mind spiraled, imagining them together, him ignoring me on purpose. My phone clattered to the car floor as my hands shook uncontrollably. Chapter 5, the panic and the email the next morning. My text still showed as unread, my calls went straight to voicemail, and the location feature for him was dark. In a desperate move, I decided to message the other woman, Rebecca, directly. I had found her email address through a simple Google search of that residential address. With trembling fingers, I typed, "You don't know me, but I'm Damian's partner of 7 years. He left me yesterday and turned off his location. Is he with you?" I sent the email, heart pounding, uncertain of what reaction it might spark. Maybe she was clueless about me, or maybe she was part of an elaborate deception. Part of me thought she might ignore me, or that her answer would confirm my worst fears. Over the following hours, I lurched between numbness and full-blown panic attacks. My breathing became so labored at one point that I nearly dialed 911. My fingers went numb, pins and needles danced over my skin. In fits, I sat on my living room floor, hugging my knees and sobbing. Why is this happening? Is this real? Some part of me kept checking my inbox for a reply from her, though none arrived that day. Meanwhile, Damian's phone remained unreachable. I stared at the plain walls of my condo, memories swirling of the joy we once shared. Now it felt as if those memories were illusions. I texted a close friend, explaining what was happening. She urged me to find a therapist, to call a helpline for emotional support. I promised I would, but each time I tried to pick up the phone, I froze. By the second day, I was half dead from exhaustion and heartbreak. I tried to sleep, but nightmares woke me. The pang of betrayal gnawed at me every waking moment. I found myself pacing the apartment, whispering to the empty air. Why? 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 That afternoon, the text, "I know what you're doing," showed as delivered, but still unread. My phone beeped around midday. No, it wasn't him or her. Just a spam message. I nearly hurled the phone across the room in frustration. Chapter 6-3. The phone call on day 3. My phone rang. My heart somersaulted when I recognized Damian's number. I scrambled to answer. For a moment, I almost let it go to voicemail, but I needed to confront him. "Hello," I managed, my voice trembling. He spoke in a cold tone. "Why the hell did you email her?" My throat constricted. If I didn't know how else to find out what was going on. "You turned off your phone. You blocked me. You vanished." He scoffed, a harsh sound that sliced through my ear. "You had no right to drag her into this. You violated her privacy. If you wanted to know something, you should have asked me." Rage flared in my chest. "I tried, Damian. For days, I tried. You refused to pick up. You blocked me." The line crackled with tension. He let out a sigh. "We had a blow-up over there because of your email. But I stayed. We talked everything through. She forgives me. She forgives you." I repeated, feeling a hot wave of nausea. "What exactly does she forgive you for?" He paused. "Look, I'm not going to play your interrogation game. Tell me what you know." My heart hammered. "Damian, I want the truth from you. Are you having an affair with her?" Silence. Then a guarded, "It wasn't planned. It just happened. I was lonely. I was unhappy." A sob caught in my throat. "So you are involved? Tell me how long." He bristled. "I'm not going to list details for you. This is humiliating. But yeah, we saw each other a few times. That's it. Now we need to figure out what we're doing about us." My head spun. "A few times. I have a list of 6 visits. Did you sleep with her on those trips?" He groaned, calling me pushy and paranoid. But eventually, under my relentless questions, he admitted that yes, they had been intimate on multiple occasions over the past 8 months. I felt a dagger in my chest. My tears spilled uncontrollably, and for a second I thought he might show regret. Instead, he was annoyed. "You forced me into this corner," he said, voice tight. "I was unhappy. You neglected me. I needed emotional support." But shock thrummed in my veins. "You're blaming me." "Not blaming," he said. "But you have to understand your role in this. You work all the time. You never have time for me. And we're not married." So I felt alone. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Damian, we agreed we were exclusive. I might be busy, but I never denied you. You never told me you were this unhappy. Instead, you sought out another woman behind my back." He launched into a tirade about how I didn't understand his needs, how he tried to tell me he felt neglected. My mind reeled. I murmured, "Must have missed those conversations," which only fueled his anger. The call lasted 2 hours, me gleaning details piece by piece, him drip-feeding confessions. At one point, I demanded an apology. He paused, then mumbled, "I'm sorry you're hurt," but followed it with, "You made me do it." In so many words, my heart broke a little more. Finally, I ended the call, shattered. He had basically confirmed the worst. I curled up on my couch, the phone clutched in my hand, chest tight with grief. The man I loved for 7 years had a secret life with another woman, and now he was blaming me for it. Chapter 7. The month of reconciliation attempts. In an odd twist, we ended up talking repeatedly on the phone after that. Some portion of me wanted clarity, or perhaps closure. Another part of me wondered if this was a crisis we could somehow repair. After all, 7 years is a long time. He claimed to want to fix things, that he didn't truly love her, that I was the one he wanted to be with. At first, I demanded the full story so I could piece together the reality. My sense of the world was scrambled. Each conversation with him was an emotional roller coaster. He'd get defensive if I used words like, cheated, or lied. He insisted we see a couples therapist, that we talk about the root problem of his loneliness. Meanwhile, I was reeling from the betrayal and the constant deflections. For 2 excruciating weeks, we tried to have civilized discussions. When did this begin? Where did you meet her? Why did you keep seeing her? Each question triggered his frustration. He'd say he couldn't recall the chronology, that it all just blurred together. He moaned that I was turning this into an inquisition. Why can't we move on? He'd ask, why do you keep dragging up the past? One phone call ended with him sighing that he didn't think there were more than 10 rendezvous. Another ended with me screaming because he admitted paying for her plane tickets to meet him in Europe. My jealousy and hurt soared. Then, in calmer moments, he'd promise me we could rebuild, that I was the one he wanted a future with. Confusion settled into my bones like a heavy stone. Part of me ached for the old normalcy, the stability of believing we were loyal to each other. Another part recognized he was gaslighting me, blaming me for not being available enough, as if that justified months of deceit. And always, the question loomed, what is he telling her? Because from the bits I gathered, he claimed she was also devastated and furious at being kept in the dark about me. He insisted at one point that they were just friends, initially, and that it had spiraled into romance. I didn't know how to stop it, he lamented. I nearly laughed in disbelief. You're 59, not some hormonal teenager. You know how to say no, I wanted to scream. Then came the day he casually mentioned he was still in touch with her. My heart jolted. What do you mean, still in touch? I asked. He grew defensive, said they talked on the phone every few days. That she was a friend he valued. That she was helping him realize the gravity of his mistake. I felt a wave of nausea. He's basically maintaining 2 relationships. He wants me to accept that. When I demanded he cut ties, he balked. You can't tell me who my friends are, he said. I never do that to you. My voice shook with anger. This is not a random friend. It's the woman you cheated on me with. He brushed that aside, claiming it was an emotional bond. Not something I should overact to. That conversation ended with him promising they'd step back while we worked on our relationship. But even his wording told me everything. She agreed to step back, not him. I felt my last threads of hope fraying. Chapter 80. The final betrayal. It was around this time that I did something I never thought I would do. I used his web hosting passwords to access his emails. I had those passwords from years ago when I helped him set up a website. It felt like crossing a moral line. But I was desperate. The trauma of not knowing the full truth was eating me alive. I opened his inbox with trembling hands, half hoping I wouldn't find anything. But I did. Within minutes, I discovered a trove of correspondence with Rebecca dating back over a year. My stomach dropped as I read email after email confirming all the things he refused to admit. They had planned multiple rendezvous, not spontaneously but meticulously. He had arranged plane tickets for her to meet him in various cities. They had elaborate conversations about hotels, about future trips, about what they'd do in the summer. It got worser. I scrolled to recent emails, the ones exchanged after my confrontation. They were carefully worded, but it was evident he was still seeking her affection, that he was telling her I was unstable, and that our relationship was on the rocks. My breath came in short bursts as I realized not only had he been unfaithful, but he was also painting me as some obstacle, while wooing her to stay. The email threads confirmed that she never knew about me until I contacted her. She was reeling from the discovery, yet his tone was all reassurance, telling her to be patient while he sorted out some issues with me. He was, in essence, living 2 contradictory stories. To me, he preached remorse, claiming he wanted to fix our relationship. To her, he cast me as the clingy, manipulative partner he needed to break free from. The heartbreak that washed over me was indescribable. My ears rang, my vision blurred with tears, and I slammed the laptop shut. I slid down to the floor, my back against the wall, numb. The man I loved, who once insisted fidelity was paramount, was still lying to me, even after everything. He was orchestrating his future with her while dangling the promise of couples therapy. To me, the sense of violation I felt at reading their emails was overshadowed by raw betrayal. I knew I had just committed an act that would enrage him if he found out, and there would be no coming back from it. But I also knew I had discovered the truth. No more illusions. For hours, I sat on my living room floor, staring at the blank wall, tears streaming silently. In that emptiness, a slow clarity emerged. I was done. There was no salvaging this. No therapy session or heartfelt apology could mend a man who continued to lie so brazenly, who had no respect for my feelings or for honesty. Chapter 9. Leaving it all behind the next day, my phone buzzed with a call from him. I let it ring out. He tried again, left a voicemail sounding frustrated, asking if we were going to set up a therapy appointment or not. I stared at my phone, my heart hollow. For the first time, I felt no inclination to answer. I typed a brief text, "I'm done," then blocked his number. A wave of trembling relief washed through me. This was final. I was severing the tie. No more months of limbo or illusions. I unblocked him an hour later to see if he'd say anything else. Sure enough, a flurry of messages arrived. Some demanding an explanation, some insulting me for giving up, some accusing me of hacking his accounts. I blocked him again. In the past, the thought of losing him would have terrified me. But I discovered a deeper terror in being shackled to a man who would lie so thoroughly, who would keep me in perpetual distrust. Ending it was the only way to save my sanity. I called a therapist that afternoon, booking an urgent appointment. I also talked to my friend, the one who had been supporting me through my meltdown. She rushed over with comforting words, reminding me that I wasn't worthless. The next days were a blur of tears, regrets, and fragile steps toward acceptance. Part of me kept bracing for him to show up at my door to unleash anger or manipulative pleas. But he lived far away, and I had blocked all forms of contact. If he dared appear, I'd call the police. I found myself repeatedly reading quotes on heartbreak and healing, trying to anchor myself. Within a week, I began the slow process of reclaiming my life. I took steps to reaffirm my independence, changed my own phone number, updated my social media privacy settings, told mutual acquaintances that I didn't want to hear about him. My new mantra was, I can't fix him, but I can protect myself. Every night, I wrote in a journal, pouring out the devastation. Some entries were just raw, tear-stained lines about how unfair it all felt. But gradually, a sense of resilience emerged. I realized that I didn't want to shape my future around a lie, nor did I want a partner who needed two women to fill his insecurities. It wasn't easy. Sleeping alone brought flashbacks of the tender nights we shared. I still had random bursts of memories that made me cry without warning, but each day that I resisted contacting him was a day I got stronger. Chapter 10. The aftermath. And hope in the weeks that followed, I focused on therapy, on my job, on reconnecting with family and friends. My therapist validated my heartbreak, praising my courage in leaving a toxic situation. She helped me see how the arrangement we had might have enabled him to hide secrets, but that ultimately his choices were not my fault. Yes, there were times I blamed myself, wondered if working full time had indeed neglected his emotional needs. But then I recalled how he never once had an open, mature conversation about dissatisfaction. Instead, he lied for months, forging an entire double life. That was not on me. For the next month, I avoided any mention of him. A couple of mutual acquaintances tried to pass me messages from him, but I told them politely that I wasn't interested. I was finally living in a reality anchored by truth rather than illusions. Surprisingly, the shame and guilt I felt for accessing his emails dissipated in the face of what I learned. Yes, it was a violation, but it confirmed that he was never going to be transparent with me. Knowing the truth set me free from the cycle of doubt, letting me walk away without lingering questions. I sometimes wondered about Rebecca. Did she eventually discover the full extent of his lies, or did she choose to stay with him, believing whatever version he gave her? A pang of sympathy stung me whenever I thought of her. She likely had her own heartbreak in this fiasco. Months later, I found myself reflecting on the relationship with surprising clarity. We had some beautiful times, but in the end, they were overshadowed by deception. The man who once extolled the virtues of honesty turned out to be a master manipulator. Even so, I didn't regret the years we spent, not entirely. I learned about my capacity to love, about the illusions I could fall for, and about the strength I had to walk away from a relationship that no longer served me. I returned to my normal routines. Work became a haven. My boss, noticing my renewed focus, assigned me to an exciting project, and I threw myself into it. On weekends, I visited old friends, explored new hobbies. Like yoga and hiking, trying to reconnect with the world, healing was neither quick nor linear. Some nights, I still woke up in tears, missing the comfort of his arms. But then I remembered the sleepless nights of suspicion, the stress that withered my self-esteem. I have no regrets walking away, I would remind myself, pressing a hand to my chest. Over time, the anxiety attacks faded. My appetite returned. My therapist commended me for cutting off contact, pointing out that staying in the limbo of reconciliation with a chronic liar would have torn me apart. She was right. Chapter 11. Telling my story, I decided to confide in a small circle of friends about the ordeal. Many were shocked, recalling how I used to speak so highly of him. A few offered well-intentioned but painful remarks. Couldn't you have tried couples counseling first? Or maybe it was just a fling. Could you have forgiven him? But I found my voice firmly responding. He lied to me after being caught. He tried to juggle both me and her even after I confronted him. That's not a fling, that's a pattern. I told them how I discovered the location anomalies, how I emailed Rebecca, and how it unraveled from there. Strangely, some of them were impressed by the thoroughness of my detective work. Others questioned the moral boundaries I crossed, like scanning his emails. I admitted it was a breach of privacy, but given the circumstances, it felt necessary for me to reclaim my sanity. Sharing my story brought me a measure of relief. It reaffirmed that I wasn't insane or paranoid. He truly was living a double life. Sometimes I read about other people's experiences with infidelity online, in forums or articles, and saw how heartbreakingly common it was for the cheater to blame the victim, to refuse accountability. It gave me perspective that I wasn't alone. Chapter 20. Acceptance and moving forward. By the time 6 months had passed since the final confrontation, I felt a quiet sense of peace. I had changed my phone number, blocked him on all platforms, and rearranged my condo to shed old memories. I even got rid of certain items that reminded me of him. Souvenirs from trips, old gifts. In therapy, I worked on self-love. I recognized that for years, I had let him define the pace of our relationship, bending my schedule to accommodate his. I realized I deserved a partner who was genuinely there for me, who wouldn't twist my emotions or force me into a detective role. On a sunny Saturday, I sat by the window in a local cafe, sipping a latte and reflecting on how far I had come. The panic once gripped me felt like a distant memory. Sure, heartbreak scars remain, but they taught me the importance of trusting my instincts. I also forgave myself for ignoring the red flags for so long. We want to believe in love, to trust the good in people. That's not a flaw, it's part of being human. Next time, though, I'd keep my eyes open from the start. Chapter 13. Life after the storm. As the months turned into a year, I rediscovered passions that had once taken a back seat. I started painting again, filling canvases with vibrant abstracts that captured my swirling emotions. I hosted small gatherings of friends, re-injecting laughter into my home. I found a quiet joy in living alone, savouring the independence. If sometimes loneliness crept in, I reminded myself it was better than being lied to. I had the freedom to shape my life however I wanted. One afternoon, I received a letter in the mail. My heart skipped when I saw Damian's handwriting on the envelope. I almost tossed it into the trash unread, but curiosity won. It was a rambling apology, sprinkled with justifications. He said he missed me, that he realized he'd made a mistake, that things with Rebecca hadn't worked out as he expected. For a moment, I felt a pang of old tenderness. But then I recalled everything I went through, the lies, the blame, the panic attacks. I calmly tore the letter into pieces and threw it away. No more illusions, no more second chances. I realized in that act I had truly moved on. My sense of self felt intact again, my boundaries stronger. I no longer needed an admission of guilt from him or a perfect apology. My closure came from reclaiming my life, from stepping out of the shadows of betrayal. Chapter 14, Rebuilding Faith in Love. Healing from betrayal doesn't mean swearing off love forever. It means learning from the pain, understanding what we can handle and what we won't tolerate. Over time, I allowed the idea of future relationships to flicker in my heart. I told myself that not all men are like Damian. Some can be honest and respectful. My friends coaxed me onto dating apps eventually, though I took it slow. Mostly, I used them to practice conversation, to remind myself that I deserved companionship. Once or twice, I met men for casual coffee dates. They were polite, interesting, but I wasn't quite ready for deep intimacy. And that was fine. I no longer felt the need to justify my past arrangement with Damian. Some people judged us for not living together, but that arrangement itself wasn't the culprit. It was the secrecy and betrayal that caused the collapse. If someone truly wants to be loyal, they will be, regardless of living situations or personal schedules. And if someone wants to cheat, they'll find a way, no matter how carefully you watch them. I learned that painful truth. The only real safeguard is mutual respect and honesty. If that's absent, there's no security measure in the world that will protect your heart. Chapter 15 from my story, My Power. As I pen these final reflections, nearly a year after I last spoke to Damian, I feel a surge of empowerment. Once upon a time, I was consumed by panic, convinced I needed his confession to set me free. But the truth is, I freed myself. Yes, I gleaned the final facts by sneaking into his emails, but ironically, it was the emotional knowledge, the sense that he would never be genuine, that truly sealed my decision. The words I read simply confirmed what my heart already knew. I'll never forget the wave of panic that washed over me when I realized he was likely in another woman's home, ignoring my messages. I'll never forget the bitterness of hearing him rationalize his affair by blaming me for working too much, or the heartbreak when he refused to give up contact with her, even while swearing he wanted me. But I also won't forget how it felt to finally walk away, to block his calls, and how that sparked the first flicker of relief in the midst of heartbreak. That was the moment I truly reclaimed my life. I share this story for anyone who might be trapped in a similar vortex of suspicion and longing. Infidelity is often layered with manipulation and denial, but you don't have to wait for the perfect confession to walk away. Sometimes, trusting your instincts is enough. Knowing your own worth is enough. I'm 47, and I'm starting fresh. My heart carries scars, but it also carries lessons. I've realized that love without transparency and respect is just a fad. I accept the sorrow of losing the man I once adored, but I celebrate the woman I've become. Stronger, wiser, unafraid to be alone if it means living in truth. So here I stand, letting go of a partner who betrayed me. He might spin his own narrative. I imagine him telling others I was controlling or that I couldn't handle his need for freedom. Let him. I know what truly happened, and I know what I need to be at peace. In my own space, in the quiet hours of dawn, I breathe in the promise of new beginnings. I realize that even after heartbreak, there's a horizon of possibility. I can paint my life with new colors, forge a love that respects me wholly, or find fulfillment on my own terms. My parting words to him, and to the memory of us, are, I did love you once, but you broke what we had. I cannot fix it alone. I choose to walk away, not out of weakness, but out of the strength to protect my heart. And that is my story. A journey through suspicion, confirmation, heartbreak, and ultimately liberation. I'm stepping forward, uncertain but brave, leaving behind the man who deceived me and the illusions that once bound me. I hold my head high, knowing that even in the darkest betrayal, I found the courage to say, "Enough."